Hello and welcome to PAX. Thanks very much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about tackling big issues in games. We're going to spend a little bit of time hearing from some of the world's leading ocean scientists and about the humid impact on our oceans and how Beyond Blue, a video game recently released by Eline Media this past June, addresses some of those issues. My name is Steve Zimmerman. I'm going to be hosting and moderating a little bit of this discussion. And joining me today, we've got Dr. Mandy Joy, Dr. David Gruber, and Michael Augst. So if I'd like to go around the horn a little bit and kind of have you all introduce yourselves and give a little bit of background information about who you all are and what it is that you do.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mandy Joy. I'm a professor of marine sciences at the University of Georgia in Athens. I'm an oceanographer. I study the microbiology of the ocean, and I work primarily in deep ocean extreme environments, such as hydrothermal vents, cold seeps, and brine pools. My interests involve how microbial processes cycle elements in the ocean, and particularly how they respond to global change.
Great. David.
Hi, I'm David Gruber, a marine biologist. I'm a professor at the City University of New York, and I'm also an explorer with National Geographic. My research in the ocean kind of covers a lot of different areas. I go all the way from microbes to sharks to whales, and I'm really interested in seeing the ocean from the perspective of marine creatures.
Hi, I'm Mike Augst, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a developer called Eline Media. We make games about the awesomeness of the real world, and I had the pleasure of working with Mandy and David to direct Beyond Blue.
Perfect, thanks. Now, there might be some folks in the audience who don't know about Eline Media or Beyond Blue, Mike. So if you could give me a little bit of information about sort of what type of games the company makes and then how this particular project got kicked off.
Sure. So we're a developer and publisher of games. We make games that are kind of at that indie budget level. Our team size is typically, 10 to 20 people during the making of a game. And in particular, we try to make games that help people understand and shape the world. And so, for instance, we made a game a number of years ago called Never Alone that featured an Alaska Native girl and a little white fox that went on a journey that helped us celebrate and extend the culture of Alaska Native community through a global audience through this game. In this particular case, we were contacted by BBC, who was in the process of making Blue Planet 2, their most recent and just breathtaking nature series about the ocean. And they had seen Never Alone. And one of the techniques that we used in Never Alone was the game itself told kind of an origin story that had survived for thousands of years and had a fictional narrative to it as a result. But we also had mini documentaries that you unlock as achievements as you progress through the game. You don't have to watch them, but they provide an opportunity to meet the folks from the Alaska Native community that helped us create the game and to talk about the culture deeply as a way to bring depth to what you see in the fictional game. And so BBC thought it might be interesting if we had access to both the scientists that help advise them in the game, in the series, as well as the footage, to be inspired by that and create a fictional game, but one based on real world science and themes that are important to our planet. So that was sort of the birth of this particular game.
Great, thank you very much. So is the BBC how you became introduced to David and Mandy?
So actually, in the process of trying to put together a full team for the game, once we decided to partner with BBC, we started the process of understanding the science that was behind the making, and we met Mandy through that, who appears in Blue Planet 2. In fact, in one of the subs, I believe at a brine pool, and some other deep places, the brine pool that appears in our game, actually. And in that process, we met an organization called OceanX. And OceanX was a partner with BBC on the documentary. It's a nonprofit that tries to bring together really awesome research vessels and then really awesome scientists. And then they document those scientific voyages through media to try to help the people on the planet engage with the cool topics that are being engaged there. So it's part media production and part scientific research. And through them, we met David, who had been working with them on a number of projects. And what we found interesting about being advised by Mandy and David is that in a lot of ways, Mandy studies the tiniest little things in the ocean. And how those things and how bigger things in the ocean react to those tiny things, and have a way to sense essentially what's there. And at the time, David was wrestling with the question of how the animal with the largest brain on the planet communicates and senses things in the ocean. So that idea of going from smallest to largest we found very interesting. And I also think that their personal journeys through their science was really contrasting. And we very much tried to find the human story that we tell in the game. And we found them to be very interesting humans. So
there's a couple of questions that I think have come out of that, but we'll work a little bit in reverse. Mandy and David, we can start with Mandy. Mike just referenced a little bit about like your personal journey as to how you got to where you are and the science that you study, being on two different scales, obviously, like from the microbial to the macro. So Mandy, how did you fall in love with the ocean and then get involved in what you got involved in?
So I fell in love with the ocean as a small child. I grew up on a farm in South Carolina, but we went to the coast every summer, and I would walk on the coast, and I'd get in the water and swim. I had this sort of it wasn't really a mask. It was this little swim goggle thing that I made, but I'd go out there and I would just swim way offshore and swim around with the fish. And, I just loved the water. And I went off to college I was pre-med, and I took a marine science class as a junior, had this incredible professor who just, made me realize that you could actually become an oceanographer and study the ocean as your job. And I was like, wow, it never occurred to me before. So, I sort of broke it to my mother and told her I was going to do this. She thought I was crazy. But she was very supportive, even though she totally thought I was crazy. But I worked initially on coral reefs, and I studied how reefs form and how they sort of are cemented and last in the fossil record, how you can learn about climate change by studying reefs. And through the course of my master's work, I came to realize that really these macro scale processes in the ocean, they were all controlled by little tiny microbes. And that if you truly wanted to understand how things worked at large scales, you had to study things at the smallest scales. So I became a microbiologist for my PhD work. And, then so that was the transformation from chemist to microbiologist. And then there was the transformation from somebody who works in shallow water to somebody who works in deep water. And that happened in a total fluke. I got invited on a submersible cruise, did my first dive to the bottom of the ocean. That was magic. I felt like a little kid, just wonder and amazement, and I can't even believe this is real. And I knew that this is what I wanted to do forever. And so since that time, the majority of my work has been focused on deep ocean processes and understanding, unlocking the mysteries of the deep sea in these extreme environments, because they have a lot to teach us about just about everything.
Fantastic and fascinating. I can only imagine what it was like to go down in a submersible for the first time. What is that? Can you try and relate what that experience is, what you're seeing, what you're feeling as you're venturing to a place where not many people get to go?
Sure. So my first submersible dive was in the coffin of the Johnson Sea Link. And they call it the coffin because it's about that size. And there are two people in there, and it's the back. So the front of the Johnson Sea Link is this plexiglass sphere. You have this beautiful view of the system, and in the coffin in the back, you have this tiny little porthole that you can see through. So the engineer that was back there with me, I sort of moved him out of the way and had my eyes glued to the porthole the entire time. What surprised me the most was that I was expecting some feeling of claustrophobia or at least discomfort. But I didn't even realize I was cold until the dive was over. There's no heat in there. The bioluminescence in the water column as you go down from the surface to the seafloor is, it's like watching stars in the desert on a crystal clear night. It's just overwhelming, and you just can't believe how much biomass there is, and it's all just lighting up and talking to you, so to speak. And then you get to the bottom, and the lights come on, and you see all of these amazing animals in this just surreal science fiction seascape in front of your eyes. And I don't know how anybody could experience that and not want to do that forever, because it's absolutely, it's so captivating. And I knew when the lights came on, it was like, wow, this is where I was supposed to be. You know, you wander around your life, you do all these different things, and then if you're really lucky, one day you stumble upon that thing that you're supposed to be doing, and you realize, wow, this is what I was meant to do. And that's what that first dive did for me. It sort of opened my eyes that this is what I was sent here to do.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that. And David, your own story as to how you got to be doing what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I really appreciate that, Mandy. That's I feel like we share a lot in our love for microbes, and my story is also, I feel like everybody's story is a little bit of this windy journey. And I grew up on this really degraded river, and that was my connection to nature. And as a kid, I didn't know any better. And this polluted river that once caught fire was like my sanctuary. I would play in it. There wasn't much living in there beyond, microbes and some small things. And I just kind of really, there was life there, but you had to really look for it. And I really enjoyed looking at it and connecting to it, and even swimming in this body of water. And then as my universe expanded, I went to college. I got into the physicality of the ocean. I became a surfer. And the surfing was a real connective way, because the ocean and its power and its might were really transformative as someone who grew up in a really degraded environment. And of course, when you're surfing, in between wave sets, you kind of look down and you wonder what's down there. And that led me to free diving, where just holding my breath and going underwater and experiencing the ocean. So it was really just very physical. I became a scuba instructor. I got really interested in free diving. And then I just never stopped. I kept going from microbes. I did a PhD in oceanography that look at microbe interactions. As I went there, I got into corals. As I went there, I went into the deep sea. I began designing equipment for submarines. I built my own remotely operated vehicle. I began scuba diving at night, looking for some of these bioluminescent creatures that Mandy was describing. And then I kind of took on an artistic approach, I think, to my science, where I have two themes right now, where I really want to design new technology that's incredibly delicate and can interact with marine life without harming it. And I have this other mission, which is to really get behind the eyes of marine life and see the world from their perspectives. And this is going to be an endless journey, because I did this for a shark. We're working on a project now with a turtle. And each one of these journeys is several years long to really feel and embody this marine creature. And in the process, it connects to it. Every time I go through this process of learning a single marine creature to an obsessive level, I come out of it and really feel deeply connected to that animal.
That's amazing. Thank you. Glad that you got to experience some sort of nature as a kid, especially with a degraded river nearby. But you do bring up a couple of interesting points, and I want to kind of throw this to Mike and then I guess the group as a whole. Mike, previously you mentioned sort of the brine pool that existed within Blue Planet 2 that Mandy got to visit, as well as then there being a brine pool in the game as well. And then David, you just mentioned some of the technology that you're sort of developing and working with, the soft touch experiences with the creatures, as well as your work with the shark and the turtles. Mike, as I understand it, some of these things translate to the game as well, perhaps not in a one-to-one, but sometimes very much so. How did you all come up with what would be brought from the real world to the game? The topic of the ocean and its health is so vast. What caused things to, please forgive the pun, float to the surface?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, Steve, our process is really to spend a lot of time with the folks who are moved by the part of the world, or who are inspired by the part of the world that we're trying to bring into a game, and find why there is such a strong human connection, why something motivates them to dedicate their life to spend, as many hours as they do away from their families and to go to places that sometimes involve risk. And, so it's really trying to answer the question in this case of why explore, why be dedicated to discovery. And I think as we surfaced those stories and those periods of inspiration for them, whether it was for Mandy, the power of these incredibly adapted microorganisms that literally might, represent the way that life had its origins, or that was from David, this very interesting alchemy of trying to bring together the power of technology to further understanding with the gentleness of trying to be in a habitat and observe without intruding. We just, we found it super interesting. We found it to be inspiring. And our goal was to try to bring those characters to life, not literally depict David or Mandy, but to try to channel what drove them, and to try to find a way to have a set piece and a story and a set of circumstances that would allow an audience to go through some of those seminal moments in what inspired them as scientists. And so it was much less saying, well, a brine pool's super cool and let's drive around it, although obviously we care about the gameplay elements of it. But it was more, what circumstances could we put someone in where they would discover a little bit of magic in the process of doing that exploration.
Fantastic. And so for Mandy and David during that process, there's obviously themes that you wanted or that you felt would be important to kind of convey in a video game. I know during some of our conversations just before we got started, you were mentioning that, you're always looking for new ways to sort of educate folks and to bring awareness about to the topics, the health of the ocean, things like that. I think perhaps I should have led with this as an opening question is, what do you both believe is the biggest environmental concern for the future? And what are the emerging ways that people can learn about it and be addressed by something like that?
David, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, first off, just, in working in putting the game together, I mean, I think probably Mandy and most of our work is just like in the lab alone or in a small team. And it was so fun to kind of come together and describe it, and share it with the Eagle Eye team as we were going about this. And there's something about the teamwork, I feel, as a scientist that's really important that comes across in this game. That one of the elements of probably any job is like you're doing it for the other people. You really love the journey in building these teams. But your question though is addressing the environmental concerns and how the game can do it. I feel that as an explorer who's like privileged to get to go to these places, like this is a huge honor to get to be in a submarine and just recognizing that. And I was just on an expedition where I was diving under the ice in Greenland and seeing the world from that side. There is a kind of connection that we get to see among the 7.7 billion people, like realizing not many people are getting to go to these places and seeing things and noticing trends of things that are happening that are kind of alarming, are very alarming, not even kind of alarming, they are alarming. And you come up and you try to tell everybody, and everybody's like, hey, everything's fine up here, and you're kind of trying to sound the warning bell because you have knowledge that the rest of our families don't have. And I feel that process in a lot of my colleagues, we've been trying this for so long to get this word out, and it's just not resonating, and we don't have the political power, and we're fragmented among labs. So I think the power of this is really bringing up some of these stories, but not in a downtrodden way, of things we can do. And what's so cool about video games and what I really love about Beyond Blue and also of Never Alone is using storytelling as a way to, we're just humans, we're storytellers, and we pass information along to each other in this storytelling way. So to encapsulate some of the things that we're seeing and some of the challenges that we're having as marine scientists to the world so they could kind of get to experience them in a realistic way, was important. I think for our single greatest challenge is understanding how to harness this crazy power of technology that we've been given in the last 150 years, and how do we harness this in a way that we don't make life miserable for ourselves, and we go off into the future with a kind of vision of what we want the oceans to look like, what we want the world to look like, what we want the interactions among ourselves to look like. And that's the biggest challenge, is like really deciding where we want to go together and realize that we're all on this spaceship, Earth and ocean together, you know, and just figure it out, you know. And I think we all have to get together on this mission and just think about it. And I think this game is really bringing up some of those topics and starting to get people to think about that.
Okay. And Mandy?
Sure. So I think, you know, sort of building off what David said, one of the hardest things so climate change is by far the biggest challenge that we as a global community face. And those are two words, but it encompasses just a plethora of impacts, from melting polar ice caps to, you know, desertification to heat waves and fires. For example, California and Colorado right now. I mean, if you look at the satellite imagery, it looks like a hurricane is over California, and the whole West Coast looks like a big hurricane, but it's not a hurricane, it's smoke. And, you know, the problem in communicating these big problems is frame of reference, because you're sitting in your living room with your TV behind you and everything's fine, right? I'm in my air-conditioned home, everything's peachy keen. There's no climate change, there's no problem. Making people sort of step outside their comfort zone and just consider the challenges that are out there. It's hard because we're all in our comfort zones, and it's not easy to get outside of your comfort zone. As scientists, though, we have a unique perspective. We see the change. We've been working in the Arctic for a long time, and we started working up there in 2008 or 2009. And over the course of the past decade, you don't need to have a model to tell you that things are changing. You can see it from one year to the next. So look at the coral reefs in the tropics. I mean, the reef that I did my master's work on is gone. It's bleached, it's gone, it's grown over in macroalgae. That has changed during, you know, my career, not even my lifetime, just the 20 years of my career. So when you make these observations and you have this unique perspective, I think it's sort of it gives you a responsibility to share that information, to share that perspective, and to help people understand what's happening and what's at stake. And that's how you promote change. And I think the Beyond Blue does just a magical job of giving people the experience of the scientific journey, you know, the one step forward, two steps back, the challenges of working collaborative as a team, the need for, you know, sort of understanding the system as a whole to sort of predict the dynamic. There's so many beautiful aspects of this game that personify what we face every day, you know, doing our science. I think it's really powerful, and it opens the minds of the player and hopefully engages them in ocean conservation, ocean stewardship, and planetary stewardship in ways that we as individual scientists could never do.
It's incredibly powerful. And Mike, I suppose kind of throwing this to the game as well, if we're talking a little bit about sort of the severity of, you know, climate change, which, you know, Mandy brought up, it's two words, but it's an all-encompassing kind of thing. How did you and your team balance or end up balancing such a weighty topic with such severe potential repercussions for the entire human race with something that also sort of needs to be digestible and entertaining in some way so that the message actually gets taken in? That's a very fine balance to kind of work towards. How did you all approach that?
Yeah, I mean, probably the toughest question that we had to answer at the beginning of the game was what time frame to set the game in. You know, should we set it in the present day? Should we set it in the future? If we set it in the future, what's our responsibility to represent that future realistically so that you can still care about it. And so, we chose to go near future, Steve. And, we built the game around the following question. We said, to Mandy and David, if you had sort of a near moonshot level mission, if you had essentially the technology and the ability to stay in the water, in the habitat in 10 or 15 years, that is well beyond your technical reach now, but achievable. We can get there. We kind of see the science. We kind of see the technology. What questions would you try to answer? And as you answered those questions, how do you think it would change our perspective on the world and the ocean? And how do you think it would move us? Why do you think we would feel emotionally invested in answering those questions? And it was that journey of them answering that question for each of them over, a period of very many months, probably over a year, that led to setting the game, honestly, in a hopeful place, a place where the world has gone through some significant rocky times, which is true in the backstory of the game, but also with a set of scientists that each have a determination to try to still, and I guess a sense of hope in their own way to try to bring it. I guess I would turn it back to Mandy and David, and because we had lots of sobering conversations about the pace of change, and how they have literally seen in their lifetime, that level of tremendous change, and yet we left every conversation kind of giddy with hope from having talked to them. And I guess I would turn it to them and say, how have you stayed hopeful in seeing the crazy change that's out there, and why do you do what you do with such a sense of aspiration for our future?
Well, I think that's a great question. So we can throw to David first on this one.
Yeah. How do I stay hopeful? I mean, I feel like, hope is the most important thing. And I think as a college professor and educator, working with so many young students and seeing them come out and like really wanting positive change and realizing that like you could change. It only takes one generation to change everything. So that just because things are the way they are now, if there's a motivation, if there's education, like we could do anything we want. We put people on the moon, we put people on the bottom of the ocean. Like we are a crazy, weird species, and we're magical. And we are one of millions of species. And I realized that we it's such an interesting blend of psychology and science that are going into the problems that confront us. And no species has ever confronted this. I always say, like, the sharks haven't gotten together in the middle of the ocean and they're like, all right, guys, we're going to have a climate meeting here because, we're making a bit of a mess over here and you sharks can't eat as much. And, so this is new. This is totally uncharted waters for us as a species. And we're navigating it together. So we got to kind of go into it with the idea of like, this is hard stuff. This has not been done, but we've done amazing things so far. So we can get out of it. And I love the kind of thinking mentality of like problem solving. This is what Mandy and I do. We problem solve where, something goes wrong on a ship out at sea. You figure out what tape you're going to use or bubble gum to fix the thing. And I feel like a similar situation now where this is really going to be all hands on deck and let's get this going. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, in my opinion. This is a 20-year plan. And that keeps me hopeful too, to realize that this isn't going to be, we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and everything's bright and sunny and everything different. This is incremental change. But I think what puts us in this perspective is Mandy and I have got a background in microbiology. We study over billions of years. And we think of change over such huge timescales, and that becomes really common for us to talk about million-year geological things is like happening really quickly. So I think, really understanding that if you think of like, where were we 30 generations ago? Where are we now just 2 generations ago? And think of like how much change we've had in the last 150 years. And now let's think creatively about, in that perspective now, that where do we want the next 100 years to go? Because we could really we could influence that trajectory now in all the decisions we make. And but there is this feeling like we're running out of runway. So there's the kind of motivation of like, we don't have that much landing strip here. And then there's the positivity of like, hey, but we can do this, so we can't give up. That's what keeps me going.
Yeah, similar for me. I think that, you know, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by the negatives. But what keeps me sort of positive is one, my children, because I think that, you know, for me personally and for many other people, you know, it's the future generations that are going to benefit by the good decisions that we make. And we've got a responsibility to make the world a bit of a better place for them. But at the same time, you know, the challenges give rise to tremendous ingenuity and I think tremendous collaboration. This is not a problem that the United States can solve. It's not a problem that the European Union can solve. It's not a problem that China can solve. We have to work together as a global collective to solve this problem. And I hope that what will happen is that, you know, as a species, I think one of the biggest problems that sort of led us to where we are now is the sort of disconnection of humans from the natural world. And this game brings people back into that natural world and sort of exposes them to the beauty, complexity, and dynamic of that world. And it's that grounding. It's that, okay, I impact this world. That's what people have to realize. Everybody has an impact. You know, no matter how big or small, every single human has an impact. So if we each change our ways so that we make ourselves have a more positive as opposed to negative impact, the collective impact is huge. So, you know, for me, it comes down to, you know, the optimism is about the possibilities that arise from when we realize that collective power and we harness that collective power. And I think we're with this next generation that I have in my class and David has in his class and my own kids, I see that desire for change, that desire to build a better world, the creativity, the excitement about what's possible. You know, we all grew up with Star Trek, right? And all the gizmos and amazing, you know, the things that they could do in Star Trek. There's lots of cool gizmos in this game. And maybe that's going to motivate, you know, some new engineers and explorers to create some new technologies that actually change the real game, the real world. So that's what makes it exciting for me, to open up people's eyes to the possibility and then enable them and excite them about being the force for change that they want to see.
That's incredible. And kind of, you've both hit upon that. And, you know, David, you were calling it a trajectory, and, you know, Mandy, you're referring to it as sort of like a collective impact. As we begin to sort of wind this down, I'd love for you both to share ways that you think, either things that people can do on a micro level, that kind of impact or would have direct impact, because we do have this ability to kind of shift time, or ways for folks to get involved now. What should they be looking to do? Where should they be researching online? What would you recommend if people wanted to learn a little bit more about how they can positively impact their world around them? Where do you start?
David, you want to take it or you want me to?
Sure. You could go first.
Well, I think, you know, I teach a class to undergraduate non-science majors called Oceans in Peril. And the last couple of lectures we talk about this the entire semester, but we talk about ways that, you know, individuals can make a difference. And there are lots of things that people can do, you know, bike instead of drive, you know, get plastics out of your life. But I've had a couple of students over the years that have singularly made a big difference. Like there was one student that I had in my class about 5 years ago, and she became obsessed with, we talk a lot about straws and how many straws are used every day and how bad plastic straws are. So she took it upon herself to push this initiative to get rid of, you know, have the restaurants in town stop putting straws out just de facto. And, you know, you have to ask for them. And she started this little website about, you know, reduce your plastic footprint. And, you know, those sorts of individual actions, from telling your parents, if you're a, you know, college student, to, you know, helping them make their house a little bit greener, replacing windows, having, you know, energy efficient appliances, putting a clothesline up in your backyard if you have one. So instead of using a dryer, you have a clothesline to dry your clothes, use that energy that's already there in the sun. Little things matter. And again, the collective impact is huge. There are a lot of websites, the Oceana, NRDC, there's lots of websites where you can find information about how you can make a difference and things that you can do to individually sort of spread the word. But it starts by setting a good example and telling your friends who will change their ways and tell their friends. And then there's a butterfly effect, and you've impacted habits of 100 or 200 people. So don't ever think that you can't make a difference as one person, because it all starts with one person. It has to. And that one person could be somebody watching this right now.
Hopefully so. David?
Yeah, I mirror a lot of that. I feel that, a lot of this is comes down to feeling like this is just such a tidal wave that it feels helpless. Like, what am I going to do? I'm just this person, living my life, trying to make a living. And I think what Mandy said is that, just do what you can, whatever it is. If you can reduce, this is really like, we have to take a top down and a bottom up approach for this problem. In one sense, we all have to kind of want the change and want to just do our part and be our best people we can be. But at the same time, we do need to influence policy. Because if everything was there for us, there was no plastics for us to use, there was a renewable energy source instead of filling up gasoline, we would use it. It's not like we wake up and I'm like, you know what, I want to really mess up the oceans today, and I'm going to just really try to, we don't have that intention in us. It's more of the system we built. So I think the same thing, really just kind of hitting it from the bottom, doing what you can. If you can fly less, if you can produce less waste. But then if you have the power and the efforts to be working at the top down, at the policy level, designing new things, keep going. Just take it to wherever your interest level is. But even if it's a tiny little part of the solution, just be that tiny little part rather than part of the problem. I think that would be a way to think of it. And just keep spreading the word and staying optimistic and realizing that with all major social movements, they don't necessarily happen overnight. This is a slow moving thing, and that if we make progress in the next, we want things to happen really quickly, but just recognize that each incremental step forward is an important one.
I think that's a really important thing as well, is that the small steps heading in the right direction that will start to make bigger changes. Mike, you talked a little bit about, as we're really getting close to wrapping up here, you talked a little bit about setting up the future for both like inspirational and aspirational reasons. And the development process, the inclusive development process that you employ in making these kind of games has got to have an impact on sort of your way of thinking as well. And like, if there was a particular fact or a tidbit or even an emotion that like you took away from working with, Mandy and David, that is positively affecting or even affecting in any way sort of your day-to-day and how you're approaching the world around you, would you be able to share something like that? Is there something that you took from this personally as well that, affects things?
Yeah, I mean, we spent so much time in the research process trying to map what it feels like to be an explorer and a scientist to something you can do in a game, right? To something that is interesting and playful and fun in a game. And, I would say we kept coming back to this idea of trying to create circumstances for you to be intimate but not intrusive with these amazing creatures that have adapted. And by being able to do that, to learn more about their current family and the richness, that is in their current and present life, but also just to learn about the millions of years of adaptation and the history that they bring, which is so much longer from a time scale than the history that we have, right? And I think, for me, just trying to create a game where you could be intimate with these creatures, but not step over the line of being intrusive to their beautiful world was something that we struggled for. And I think the guidance of Mandy and David was very much, we could have chosen to play the game from the sub. We could have chosen to play the game from a drone where you had all really cool technology. And to be honest, probably more realistic if we played it from a sub or a drone, because you can take them to many more places than you can take the human body. But time and time again, they would coach us to stretch that a little bit so that you could be looking over the shoulder of a human who's not well adapted to this environment and see that human in the context of these creatures who have an amazing adaptation. And I would say, I feel like we strove to create a sense of understanding the creature's family and history through being present in the game. And so I hope we were successful with that, because to me, it's really hard to walk away and not have care and a sense of, I don't know, just a sense of wanting something to survive when you know it so intimately. And rather than, create a game that had, ways for you to turn the dashes on carbon or other systemic things, we wanted you to leave knowing something about a whale's family. And we wanted you to leave, knowing something about how that was resonant, emotionally for the character who went something similar in their family. And I guess that was the choice that we drew from the hours and hours and hours of talking about the science, was that emotional connection to nature. So
beautiful. Thank you. That wraps it up for us today. For those that are looking for a little bit more information about this particular topic or how they might want to get involved as well, you can visit beyondbluegame.com/get involved. And there is a list of organizations that Eli Media worked with throughout the process of this that will kind of give you an idea as to where you might be able to take little steps as well to kind of help change and positively impact the environment and the world around you. For now, we want to say thank you very much to Dr. Mandy Joy, Dr. David Grubert, and Michael Angst for joining us today here on this panel. And we hope that everybody else out at PAX who's attending PAX online and enjoying these digital conventions are safe, healthy, and well. And we will see you all very soon. Very much. Take care.